Caleb Hart slapped his last two silver dollars onto a Montana auction block in the blistering summer of 1873, he had no intention of buying a wife. He came to town for salt and nails, not a woman, but watching vultures circle a quiet girl with dust on her hem and shame in her eyes, watching saloon men bid like she was livestock, something inside him cracked. The auctioneer's gavel was falling. Her future was about to be decided by men who'd never see her as human. Caleb's hand moved before his mind could stop it. If you're ready to see how two strangers bound by desperation become partners, lovers, and legends of the Montana frontier, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The dust hung thick in the air of Salvation Creek that afternoon, coating everything in a fine amber grit that tasted like drought and broken promises. July had arrived with a vengeance, turning the Montana Territory into a furnace that baked the earth until it cracked like old leather. Caleb Hart stood at the edge of the crowd, hat pulled low, trying to remember why he'd bothered coming to town at all. Salt. He needed salt for the cattle. And nails. The fence posts were coming loose again, that's what he told himself. But the truth was simpler and lonelier. He needed to see other human faces before he forgot what civilization looked like. The ranch, if you could call 40 acres of stubborn grass and dying cattle a ranch, was killing him slowly. 3 years of drought, 2 years alone since his father's death. One more season, maybe 2, before the bank came calling. Caleb was 28 years old and felt 50, his hands rough as bark, his prospects drying up faster than the creek beds. He should have left already, should have grabbed his supplies and headed back before the afternoon heat got worse, but the crowd had gathered in the town square, and curiosity, that old familiar curse, kept his boots planted. "Gentlemen," the auctioneer's voice carried over the murmuring crowd, oily and theatrical. "The final lot of the afternoon, a special opportunity for a discerning man." Caleb's jaw tightened. He knew what this was. Everyone did. The mail-order bride auctions had become common enough in the territories. Women shipped west with promises of marriage and stability, parceled out to the highest bidder when their intended grooms failed to appear. Sometimes the men died. Sometimes they just changed their minds. Either way, the women ended up here, standing on wooden platforms while strangers appraised them like horses. It turned his stomach, earned. He started to turn away when he saw her. She stood on the platform with her chin up, but her hands were clasped so tight her knuckles had gone white. Mid-20s, he guessed. Slim build, brown hair pulled back severe and practical. A dress that had once been fine but now bore the wrinkles and dust of hard travel. Her face was pale beneath the sun, and her eyes, dark, sharp, taking in everything, held something that made Caleb pause. Not fear. Not exactly. It was harder than that. Colder. It was resignation. "Miss Lillian Rowe," the auctioneer announced, gesturing with a flourish that made Caleb's teeth grind. "Late of Philadelphia, educated, literate, can read, write, cipher. Came all this way to marry Samuel Hutchins, but as you all know, Sam took a fever last month. Tragic business. But his loss is your gain, gentlemen." A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. Lillian's expression didn't change, but Caleb saw her throat work as she swallowed. "Now, I'll be honest with you boys," the auctioneer continued, warming to his performance. "She's not the prettiest flower we've had up here. A bit plain, if we're speaking truthfully. A bit old, and she's got no dowry to speak of. Came with nothing but the clothes on her back and a trunk of books." More laughter. Someone called out, "Books won't keep a man warm at night." The auctioneer grinned. "Maybe not, but she's healthy, strong, got all her teeth, and like I said, educated. Could teach your children their letters, keep your accounts. That's worth something to a practical man." Caleb watched Lillian's face. Still nothing. She stood there absorbing their mockery like rain, like she'd learned long ago that resistance only made it worse. "Let's start the bidding at $5, the auctioneer said. "Come on now, gentlemen. $5 for a wife's a bargain in any territory." Silence. The crowd shifted, boots scuffing dirt. Men looked at each other, looked away. The afternoon heat pressed down. "No one? $4 then. $4 for Miss Lillian Rowe of Philadelphia." More silence. Caleb could feel the humiliation radiating off the platform like heat shimmer. This was worse than not being chosen. This was being rejected publicly, assigned a price, and found wanting even at that reduced rate. $3, the auctioneer said, and now his voice had lost its theatrical edge. This was becoming awkward, bad for business. Surely someone can spare $3. Finally, a voice from the back. $2. Caleb's head snapped around. Jake Morrison, town drunk and part-time saloon swamper, was grinning with half his teeth missing. I'll give you $2 for her. Could use someone to clean up the saloon, cook for the boys. The auctioneer hesitated. Now, Jake, this is a marriage arrangement. I'll marry her proper if that's what it takes to make it legal, Jake said, and the men around him laughed. But she'll be working off that $2 for a good long while. On the platform, Lillian closed her eyes. Just for a second. Just long enough for Caleb to see the last thread of her composure starting to fray. $2, the auctioneer said slowly. I have $2. Anyone else? This is your last chance, gentlemen. Going once. Caleb's hand moved to his pocket. His fingers found the coins there, his last silver dollars, the ones he'd been saving for winter supplies, for the moment when desperation finally trumped pride and he had to choose between eating and keeping the ranch. This was insane. He didn't know this woman, didn't need a wife, could barely feed himself, let alone another mouth. The ranch was failing. He had nothing to offer her but hardship and isolation and the slow, grinding failure he'd been living for 3 years. Going twice? Her eyes opened, dark eyes that swept across the crowd and landed, for just a heartbeat, on Caleb. She didn't know him from any other stranger, but in that moment he saw what she saw, a sea of faces, some pitying, some cruel, some simply indifferent, and beyond them, a future she couldn't control, being shaped by men who'd never asked what she wanted. Something in Caleb's chest twisted hard. $3, he heard himself say. The crowd turned. The auctioneer's eyebrows went up. Jake Morrison's grin faded. Caleb stepped forward, pulling the coins from his pocket. Not $3. He had 2 silver dollars and a handful of copper cents that wouldn't make the difference. He met the auctioneer's eyes and slapped both silver dollars onto the wooden edge of the platform with a sharp crack that cut through the murmuring crowd. $2, Caleb said flatly. Same as Morrison bid. But I'm offering 2 silver dollars, not $2 in scrip or promises. And I've got a ranch, a roof, and a name that isn't tied to a saloon floor. The auctioneer looked between Caleb and Jake, calculating. Silver was silver. And Caleb, for all his ragged edges, was known as honest, quiet, kept to himself. Wasn't known for drinking or gambling or beating animals. That's the same bid, Jake protested. Not quite, the auctioneer said slowly. Silver's worth more than paper, and a ranch is worth more than a mop and bucket. He raised his gavel. I have 2 silver dollars from Caleb Hart. Anyone want to go higher? Silence. Jake muttered something obscene but didn't reach for his pocket. Going once, going twice. The gavel fell. Sold to Caleb Hart. The crowd began to disperse, the entertainment over. Caleb stood there with his heart pounding, wondering what the hell he'd just done. He'd just spent his last money on a woman he'd never met, for reasons he couldn't quite articulate even to himself. He forced himself to look up at the platform. Lillian was looking down at him, her expression unreadable. She descended the steps carefully, precisely, like every movement was measured and controlled. When she reached the ground, she stood before him, a foot of dusty space between them. Up close, he could see she was older than he'd first thought, late 20s, maybe 30. There were fine lines at the corners of her eyes, shadows beneath them that spoke of too many sleepless nights. Her dress was well made but worn, mended in places with careful, invisible stitches. Her hands were soft, uncalloused. City hands. Mr. Hart, she said. Her voice was quiet, refined, with the careful diction of someone educated back east. I'm Lillian Rowe. Caleb, he said, then cleared his throat. Just Caleb. Thank you, she said, for what you did. I realize you don't know me, and I don't know you, but I want you to understand that I'll honor whatever arrangement brought you to bid today. I'm healthy, capable of hard work, and I learn quickly. I won't be a burden. He heard what she wasn't saying. I know you didn't want this. I know I'm not what anyone would choose. I'll make myself useful enough to justify the cost. You got belongings? He asked, because he didn't know what else to say. A trunk. At the depot. I'll get it loaded on my wagon. She nodded. They stood there another moment in awkward silence while the square emptied around them. The auctioneer was already gone, moved on to his next piece of business. The $2 sat on the platform edge, unclaimed. Those are yours, Lillian said, nodding toward the coins. Your payment. You should take them back. Caleb looked at the silver, then at her. That's not how this works. I don't know how this works, she said, and for the first time he heard something crack in her voice. Not weakness, but honesty, raw and undefended. I got on a train 6 weeks ago thinking I was coming to marry a man who wanted a partner. I arrived to find him dead and buried. I've been in a boarding house waiting for someone to decide what to do with me. Today I learned my value is $2 and the mercy of strangers. She met his eyes. So forgive me, Mr. Hart, but I genuinely don't know how any of this works. Caleb picked up the coins, weighed them in his palm, then dropped them into her hand. Her fingers closed around them reflexively. Keep them, he said. You might need them someday. For what? Stage fare, if you decide to leave. Her expression shifted. Surprise, maybe, or confusion. You're giving me the means to leave before we've even... I don't hold people against their will, Caleb said. I bought your contract because Morrison was going to, and I know what that would have meant. But I'm not buying you. You understand? You're not property. You're not a servant. I need help on my ranch, and you need a place to be. That's the arrangement. If it doesn't suit you, you take those dollars and get on the next stage east. Lillian stared at him like he was speaking a language she didn't quite understand. Then, slowly, she tucked the coins into her pocket. I'll get my trunk, she said. The ride back to the ranch took 2 hours through country that grew wilder and emptier with each mile. Caleb drove the wagon in silence, hyper-aware of the woman sitting beside him, back straight, hands folded in her lap, watching the landscape roll past with an expression he couldn't read. The road, such as it was, cut through rolling grassland broken by stands of pine and rocky outcroppings. The sun beat down mercilessly. Grasshoppers sang in the brush. Once, a hawk circled overhead, riding thermals with lazy grace. How far is your ranch? Lillian asked finally. Another hour. It's called the Hart Place. Was my father's. Now it's mine. You work it alone? Yeah. How many acres? 40. Got about 30 head of cattle left. Used to be more. She absorbed this information silently. He could feel her doing calculations, measuring the scope of what she'd gotten herself into. I should tell you, Caleb said, forcing the words out. It's not much. The house is small. One room, basically. There's a loft where I sleep. You can have the bed. I'll fix up something else. That's not necessary. It is, he said firmly. We're doing this proper. You'll have privacy. I'll have mine. We'll work together on the ranch, share meals, keep the place running, but this is a business arrangement, wife in name only, for legal purposes. You understand? He felt her turn to look at him, but he kept his eyes on the road. Why? She asked. Why what? Why those terms? Most men who buy... She stopped, corrected herself. Most men who marry through these arrangements expect different terms. Caleb's jaw worked. I'm not most men, and I'm not looking for a bedmate. I'm looking for help. A partner. Someone who can handle the work while I handle the herd. Someone who won't run off the first time things get hard. And you think I won't run? I think, Caleb said carefully, that you came all the way from Philadelphia to marry a stranger because you needed a new start. I think you stood on that platform today and took their mockery because you didn't have another choice. I think you're tougher than you look, and I think if the work's fair and the treatment's decent, you'll stay. Silence. Then, you're right, about all of it. He glanced at her. She was still watching the horizon, but something in her posture had shifted, less rigid, less defended. I was a school teacher in Philadelphia, she said quietly. I'm 31 years old. I never married because I was caring for my mother through a long illness. When she died, I found she'd left debts I couldn't pay. The school board let me go. They said I was distracted, unreliable. Without employment, I couldn't keep my lodgings. A friend showed me an advertisement for Western brides, and I thought. She trailed off. Thought it was a way out, Caleb finished. Yes, Samuel Hutchins' letters were kind. He seemed steady, honest. He wanted someone educated, someone who could teach any future children. It seemed like a fair exchange. My skills for his stability. Her voice hardened. I didn't expect to arrive and find him 6 feet under. I'm sorry. Are you? You benefited from his death. Caleb's hands tightened on the reins. I didn't benefit from anything. I made a choice in a moment, same as you did 6 weeks ago when you got on that train. We're both trying to survive, Miss Rowe. I figure the least we can do is be honest about it. She considered this. What do you need then? Specifically. If this is a business arrangement, I should know the terms. Cook, clean, mend, help with the garden if you can manage it. Learn the ranch work. You'll need to handle the chickens, maybe help with the cattle when branding comes. Keep the books if you're good with numbers. Make this place livable instead of just survivable. And in return? Roof, food, protection, a legal name if you need it, fair treatment, respect. He paused. And when harvest comes, if there's profit, you get half. Her head snapped toward him. Half? Partners split equal. That's how it works. Mr. Hart. Caleb. Caleb, she said, and he heard her testing the name, feeling the shape of it. That's more than generous. That's fair, he interrupted. You'll be working hard as me, probably harder since you're learning new skills. You deserve equal share in whatever comes of it. He met her eyes briefly. If anything comes of it. You don't think it will? He looked back at the road. I think the drought's killing me slowly, and I'm one bad season from losing everything. I think I'm probably a fool for spending my last silver on a stranger when I should have saved it for winter supplies. And I think the odds are good that come spring, we'll both be looking for new situations. He shrugged. But maybe not. Maybe we get lucky. Maybe the rains come and the cattle thrive and we make something work. I've stopped trying to predict the future, Miss Rowe. I just show up and do the work and hope that's enough. She was quiet for a long moment, then, Lillian. What? My name. It's Lillian. If we're going to be partners, you should use it. Something eased in Caleb's chest. Lillian, he said. All right. They drove on through the heat and dust, two strangers bound together by circumstance and desperation, heading toward a failing ranch and an uncertain future. But for the first time in 3 years, Caleb wasn't alone. He didn't know if that would make things better or worse. He supposed they'd both find out. The Hart Ranch appeared on the horizon just as the sun began its descent toward the mountains. Lillian's first impression was stark. A small log cabin with a sagging porch, a barn that leaned slightly to one side, a broken fence surrounding a modest pasture where thin cattle grazed on brown grass. Everything looked worn, used up, held together by stubbornness and wire. This was what $2 silver bought. This was her future, at least for now. Caleb pulled the wagon up to the cabin and set the brake. It's not much, he said, echoing his earlier warning. It's shelter, Lillian replied, climbing down before he could offer help. That's more than I had this morning. He grabbed her trunk from the wagon bed, heavier than he'd expected, probably full of those books the auctioneer had mentioned, and carried it inside. Lillian followed, bracing herself. The cabin was dim and spare, one main room with a stone fireplace, a rough wooden table and 2 chairs, a narrow bed in the corner with a faded quilt. A ladder led to a loft space above. Shelves held mismatched dishes, supplies, tools. Everything was functional and nothing was beautiful. The floor was swept, but the corners held dust. The windows needed washing. The whole place smelled like loneliness and leather and old smoke. But it was clean in its way. Organized. The work of a man who took care of what he had, even if what he had wasn't much. Bed's yours, Caleb said, setting the trunk down. I'll sleep in the loft. There's a rain barrel out back for washing. Privy's about 50 yards that direction. I usually eat breakfast at dawn, supper at sunset. You can adjust the schedule if you want. You're doing the cooking now." Lillian turned slowly, taking it all in. "What did you eat before I arrived?" "Beans, mostly, hardtack, jerky when I had it, coffee." "That's not a diet. That's slow starvation." His mouth quirked. Not quite a smile, but close. "Welcome to ranching, Lillian." She moved to the shelves, examining the supplies. Flour, low, salt, almost gone. He really had needed to go to town. Coffee, beans, a few cans of peaches, some questionable dried meat. A jar of something that might have been preserves once but now looked suspect. She opened the flour sack and found weevils. "When did you last go to town for supplies?" she asked. "Month ago, maybe more." "This flour's infested." "I know, I've been picking them out." Lillian closed her eyes briefly, summoning patience. Then she turned to face him. "All right, here's what's going to happen. Tomorrow, you're going back to town for proper supplies, and I'm giving you a list. Tonight, I'm making something edible out of whatever's left that isn't actively crawling. And first thing in the morning, I'm starting a proper garden because no one should live on beans and weevil flour hardtack." Caleb blinked at her. "I don't have money for supplies." "You have credit at the general store, don't you?" "Some, not much." "Then we'll use what you have and I'll make it stretch. That's what I do. I make things stretch." She rolled up her sleeves. "Now, is there fresh water for cooking or do I need to haul it from the creek?" "There's a pump by the barn. Water's good." "Fine. I'll need a bucket, a pot, something to cut with, and whatever vegetables you've got that aren't completely desiccated." For the first time since they'd met, Caleb Hart smiled, a real smile, quick and surprised. "Yes, ma'am." "Don't ma'am me. I'm Lillian. I'm your partner, and we're both going to survive this if I have anything to say about it." She paused, met his eyes. "That's the arrangement, isn't it? We both survive?" "That's the arrangement," Caleb agreed. She nodded once, sharp and decisive. "Then let's get to work." That first night, Lillian made a stew from rehydrated beans, the last sad carrot from the root cellar, some wild onions Caleb showed her how to find near the creek, and careful spices from her own trunk. Cardamom, pepper, a precious bay leaf. It wasn't fancy, but it was hot and filling and better than anything Caleb had eaten in months. They sat across from each other at the rough table, eating in silence while the last light faded from the windows. Crickets sang outside. A coyote called in the distance. "This is good," Caleb said finally. "This is adequate," Lillian corrected. "With proper supplies, I can do better." "I believe you." She studied him across the table. This stranger she'd legally married in the eyes of the territory. This man who'd saved her from a fate she didn't want to contemplate. He was younger than his weathered appearance suggested, probably not yet 30. Tall, lean to the point of gaunt, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of creek water. His hands were scarred and calloused, the hands of someone who'd worked hard his whole life. There was something steady about him, something quiet and strong that she hadn't expected. "Why did you really bid on me?" she asked. He looked up from his bowl. "I told you. You told me what you needed. That's not the same as why you acted. You could have let Morrison win. You could have walked away. Instead, you spent your last money on a stranger. Why?" Caleb set down his spoon. "My mother," he said slowly, "came west as a mail-order bride, married my father sight unseen. He was a good man, rough, hard-working, honest, but he wasn't gentle, and she wasn't built for this life. She was from Boston, educated like you, loved books, music, nice things. Out here, she had none of that. Just work and isolation and a husband who didn't understand why she couldn't be happy with what he could provide. What happened to her? Fever took her when I was 12. But I remember," he paused, choosing words carefully. "I remember the way she looked sometimes, standing on the porch at sunset, staring east like she could see all the way back to Boston if she just looked hard enough. Like she was a prisoner here, like she'd made a terrible mistake and couldn't unmake it." Lillian's throat tightened. "I saw that same look on your face today," Caleb continued, "on that platform. And I thought, If I don't act right now, you're going to end up like my mother, trapped in a life that breaks you slowly. At least this way, you'd have a choice. You'd have those $2 in your pocket and a door you can walk through if you decide this isn't what you want. She sat with that for a long moment, absorbing the unexpected complexity of this man who seemed so simple on the surface. Your mother, Lillian said quietly. Do you blame your father for bringing her here? No, he loved her in his way. He just didn't know how to show it in ways that mattered to her. And she loved him too, I think. But love isn't always enough when the life itself is grinding you down. Is that why you insisted on separate sleeping arrangements? You're afraid history will repeat itself? Caleb met her eyes. I'm afraid I'll fail you the way my father failed her. I'm afraid I'm too much like him. Good intentions, hard work, but not enough softness. Not enough of what someone like you needs to be happy. Someone like me? Educated, refined, used to civilization. Lillian almost laughed. Mr. Hart, Caleb, I'm not refined, I'm practical. I spent 5 years caring for a dying woman, watching our money disappear to doctors who couldn't help, taking charity from neighbors who pitied us. I taught children who didn't want to learn in a school that didn't pay enough to live on. I'm not some delicate flower who needs coddling. I'm a survivor, same as you. He studied her face in the lamplight. Maybe so. There's no maybe about it. I'm here because I choose to be. I'll stay as long as the arrangement is fair and the work is honest. And if the time comes when one of us wants out, we'll handle it like adults. She leaned forward. But don't protect me from hard work or hard choices because you're afraid I'll break. I'm tougher than your mother was, apparently, and you might be more flexible than your father. We're not them. This is our arrangement to make or break. Something shifted in Caleb's expression. Respect, maybe, or relief. All right, he said. Then tomorrow we start fresh. I'll show you the ranch, teach you what you need to know. You tell me what you need from town, and I'll make it happen. We figure this out as we go. As partners, Lillian said. As partners, Caleb agreed. They shook hands across the table, sealing their bargain. Her hand was soft in his calloused one, but her grip was firm, equal. Outside, the Montana night deepened, vast and star-filled and indifferent to the small dramas of human hope. Inside the cabin, two people who'd been strangers that morning began the slow, uncertain work of building something that might, if they were lucky, if they were stubborn enough, become a life worth living. Lillian lay in the narrow bed that night, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of Caleb settling into the loft above her. The ropes creaked. He shifted once, twice, then went still. She stared at the dark ceiling and thought about the journey that had brought her here. Her mother's death, the debts, the shame, the desperate decision to answer Samuel Hutchins' advertisement. She thought about standing on that platform today, absorbing the crowd's mockery, feeling the last of her dignity crumble. Then she thought about the moment Caleb Hart's voice cut through the noise, the sound of silver hitting wood, the look in his eyes when he told her she wasn't property. She'd come west expecting one kind of bargain and found another entirely. She didn't know yet if this was better or worse, but it was different, and different right now felt like possibility. She closed her eyes, exhausted beyond measure, and let sleep take her. In the loft, Caleb stared into the darkness and wondered what the hell he'd gotten himself into. He had a wife now, a partner, a woman sleeping in his bed who'd looked him in the eye and told him she was a survivor. He believed her. That was the strange part. After years of trusting nothing and no one, he believed this stranger who'd fallen into his life like rain in a drought. Maybe that made him a fool. Maybe it made him something else. Time would tell. He pulled the thin blanket up to his chin and closed his eyes, listening to the familiar creak of the cabin settling, the distant sound of cattle lowing in the pasture. Tomorrow would bring work. It always did. But now there'd be someone else sharing the burden, someone who didn't flinch from hard truths, someone who'd survived her own trials and come out with steel in her spine. For the first time in 3 years, Caleb Hart fell asleep without the weight of complete solitude crushing his chest. It wasn't hope, exactly, but it was close enough to start with. Dawn came cold and gray, the kind of morning that promised nothing but hard work and no mercy. Lillian woke to the sound of Caleb already moving around downstairs, the scrape of the stove door, the clank of the coffee pot. She dressed quickly in the dim light, her second-best dress, already resigned to ruining it, and climbed down to find him standing by the window, staring out at the land with a cup of coffee in his hands. "Morning," she said. He turned, nodded. "Coffee's hot. Figured you'd want some before we start." She poured herself a cup from the battered pot, no milk or sugar because there wasn't any, and took a sip. It was strong enough to strip paint, bitter as regret, and exactly what she needed. "What's first?" she asked. "I'll show you the ranch, all of it, where things are, what needs doing, what to watch for, then we'll see what you can handle and what needs more teaching." He paused. "You ever been around livestock?" "I've read about them." His mouth twitched. "That's not the same thing." "I'm aware. That's why I said teaching, not doing." She met his eyes over the rim of her cup. "I'm not proud, Caleb. If I don't know something, I'll say so. But I learn fast, and I don't forget." "Fair enough." He drained his coffee and set the cup down. "Get your boots on. We've got a lot of ground to cover before the heat sets in." They stepped out into the morning, and Lillian got her first real look at the Hart Ranch in daylight. What she saw made her chest tighten. The barn needed new boards. The fence posts were listing like drunkards. The pasture grass was thin and yellow, grazed down to nothing in patches. The cattle, 30 head Caleb had said, were scattered across the far end of the property, ribs showing, moving slow. "Drought's been bad for 3 years, Caleb said, reading her expression. "Used to have 60 head, lost half to thirst and poor grazing, lost more trying to drive them to better grass and having them collapse on the way." "Well, what about the creek?" "Still running, but barely. Some years it's dry by August. This year it might last till September if we're lucky." He started walking, and she fell into step beside him. "The well's good, though. That's one thing my father did right. He dug deep. We won't die of thirst, but the cattle need more than what the land's giving them." They walked the fence line first. Caleb showed her the weak spots, the places where wire had snapped or posts had rotted through. He explained how to string new wire, how to sync posts properly, how to check for gaps that might let cattle wander. "You think you can manage fence repair?" he asked. Lillian looked at the wire cutters and hammer he'd handed her. "I think I can learn. You'll tear up your hands at first. Then they'll toughen up." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right. We'll start you on small repairs. Work your way up to the bigger jobs." They moved on to the barn. Inside it smelled like hay and leather and animal warmth. A few chickens scratched in the corners. There was a milk cow in one stall, skinny but alert, and an old horse that looked at them with patient, tired eyes. "This is Jessie," Caleb said, stroking the horse's nose. "She's 22, probably got a few more years in her if we're careful. The cow's name is Molly. She gives about a gallon a day when she's fed right, which she hasn't been lately." "I can milk a cow," Lillian said. "My grandmother had one when I was young. I remember the basics." "Good. That's your morning job now. Milk Molly, feed the chickens, collect eggs. Can you handle that?" "Yes." They went through the rest of the routine, where the tools were kept, how to pump water from the well, how to check the cattle for signs of illness or injury. Caleb's teaching style was direct and patient, showing her once, watching her try, correcting without criticism. He treated her like someone capable of learning, not someone to be coddled or dismissed. By mid-morning, Lillian's back ached and her hands were already developing blisters. But she'd successfully milked Molly, collected 6 eggs, and repaired a small section of fence under Caleb's supervision. It wasn't much, but it was a start. "You're doing fine," Caleb said as they walked back toward the cabin for a quick meal. "Better than I expected for the first day." "What did you expect?" "Honestly, I thought you might last until noon and then tell me this was a mistake." Lillian wiped sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. "The day's not over yet." He almost smiled. "No, it's not." Over a lunch of yesterday's leftover stew and hard bread, Lillian brought up the subject that had been nagging at her all morning. "Your books," she said. "The ranch accounts. When can I see them?" Caleb's expression shuddered. "Why?" "Because you said I could keep them. Because I need to know where we stand financially. Because I can't plan or budget if I don't know what we're working with." She paused. "Unless you've changed your mind about that part of the arrangement." "No, I haven't changed my mind." He stood, moved to a shelf, and pulled down a worn ledger. He set it on the table in front of her with a heavy thud. It's all there. Every penny spent, every head of cattle bought or sold, every debt owed. My father started it, and I kept it going. It's not pretty. Lillian opened the ledger and began reading. Caleb watched her face, waiting for the judgment he was sure would come. What she saw made her stomach sink. 3 years of declining profits. Cattle deaths recorded in stark numbers. Debts to the bank, to the feed store, to neighbors who'd loaned supplies. Income that barely covered expenses. A slow, documented slide toward failure. But she also saw something else. Meticulous record-keeping, honest accounting, careful notes about weather patterns and cattle health. This was the work of someone who cared, who was trying desperately to save something that was slipping away despite his best efforts. "You owe the bank $400, she said quietly. "Yeah, due at the end of October, after harvest, theoretically." "What harvest? You don't have crops." "Cattle sales. If I can get them fat enough to sell, if the market price is decent, if everything goes right." He laughed, bitter. A lot of ifs. Lillian ran her finger down the columns, calculating. "You've been paying the interest but not touching the principal. That's all I can afford." "How much would you get for 30 head of cattle in good condition?" "Maybe 600 if I'm lucky, maybe less." "So you'd clear 200 after the bank payment. That would cover winter supplies and leave a small cushion." "If they're in good condition. Right now, they're half-starved. Nobody's going to pay good money for walking skeletons." Lillian closed the ledger and looked at him. "Then we fatten them up." "With what? The grass is dying. I can't afford supplemental feed." "Can you afford to lose everything?" The question hung between them, sharp and unavoidable. Caleb's jaw worked. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we go back to town tomorrow with this ledger and negotiate. We show the bank and the feed store that you have a plan, that you have help now, that you're not just one man barely holding on. We ask for an extension on the debt payment, maybe until spring. We ask the feed store for credit on supplemental feed with the promise of payment after cattle sales. We buy ourselves time." "They won't go for it." "They might. Because what's their alternative? Foreclosing on a failing ranch gives them nothing. At least this way they have a chance of getting paid." She leaned forward. "But you have to show them you're not just hoping anymore. You have to show them you have a real plan." Caleb stared at her. "You've been here one day. And I can already see what needs to happen. You're too close to it. You've been grinding yourself down for 3 years, and you can't see past tomorrow. But I can. I've managed household budgets that were just as precarious. I know how to negotiate with creditors, how to make a little stretch a long way, how to present a case that makes people believe." She tapped the ledger. "This is good record-keeping, Caleb. It shows you're responsible, honest, careful. That counts for something." He sat down slowly, looking at her like she was speaking a foreign language. "Why would you do this? You could walk away. You have the $2. You don't owe me anything." "I owe you my dignity," Lillian said quietly. "You gave me that yesterday when you bid, and more than that, I need this to work as much as you do. If this ranch fails, I'm back to nothing. No home, no prospects, no future. So yes, I have a vested interest in saving it. We save it together, or we fail together. Those are the only 2 options I see." Caleb was quiet for a long time, turning the coffee cup in his hands. Then, "All right, we'll go to town tomorrow. We'll try your plan." "Not my plan, our plan." "Our plan," he agreed. That afternoon, Lillian insisted on riding out to see the cattle up close. Caleb saddled Jessie and helped her mount. She'd ridden before, years ago, but not well and not recently. She sat the horse awkwardly at first, but by the time they reached the herd, she'd found her balance. The cattle were worse up close. Thin, dull-eyed, standing in scattered groups across the brown grass. A few lifted their heads as Caleb and Lillian approached, but most didn't bother. "That one," Lillian said, pointing to a cow standing apart from the others. "Something's wrong with her." Caleb looked where she indicated. "How do you know?" "She's holding her left rear leg differently, and she's not grazing with the others." He studied the cow more carefully, then swore softly. "You're right. Looks like she might have stepped in a hole or got kicked. I didn't notice." He dismounted and approached the cow slowly, talking low. The animal didn't run, just watched him with dull acceptance. Lillian watched as Caleb examined the leg, running his hands carefully over the joint. "Not broken," he called back, "but she's lame. I'll need to bring her in, keep her off it for a few days." "Can we afford to lose her milk production? Can we afford to lose her permanently if the leg gets worse and infected?" He straightened. "You've got good eyes, Lillian. Most people wouldn't have noticed." "I pay attention," she said simply. They spent the next hour riding the perimeter of the herd while Caleb taught her what to look for: signs of illness, injury, stress. He showed her how to read their behavior, how to spot the ones that needed attention, how to move them gently without spooking them. "You have to think like them," he explained. "They're not smart, but they're not stupid either. They know when something's wrong. They know when they're not getting enough food. Right now, they're just trying to survive, same as us." Lillian watched the cattle move across the sparse grass, these living creatures whose survival was tied to hers now. "How many do you think we'll lose before October?" "Honestly, 5, maybe 6 if we're unlucky. The weakest ones won't make it even with supplemental feed. And if we do nothing? 10. Maybe half the herd." The math was brutal and simple. They rode back to the cabin in silence, the weight of it pressing down on both of them. That evening, Lillian wrote out the supply list while Caleb tended the lame cow in the barn. She kept it practical: flour without weevils, salt, coffee, dried beans, bacon if they could afford it, sugar for preserving, seeds for a late garden. Nothing fancy, nothing extra, just survival. When Caleb came in, she handed him the list. He read it over and nodded. "This is good. Reasonable." "I also wrote out the argument for the bank," she said, showing him a second sheet of paper. "Key points, numbers to support them, a proposed timeline. You should read it, make sure you agree with the approach." He took the paper and read slowly, his lips moving slightly as he worked through the words. Lillian realized he could read, but not easily, probably self-taught or barely schooled. Another thing his father hadn't given him. "This makes sense," he said finally. "You think the banker will listen?" "I think he'll listen if we present it right. You need to be calm, confident, factual. Don't apologize, don't beg. Just lay out the situation and the solution. Make him see that helping you is helping himself." "I'm not good at talking to people." "Then I'll do the talking. You just stand there and look honest and hardworking, which shouldn't be difficult since that's what you are." Caleb almost smiled. "You're bossy, you know that?" "I'm practical. There's a difference." She stood and moved to the stove where she'd set bread dough to rise earlier. "Now, I'm going to bake this bread and make a proper supper, and you're going to clean up and try to look presentable for tomorrow. First impressions matter, even in Montana." "Yes, ma'am," he said, and this time the smile broke through, small but real. They fell into an easy rhythm that evening. Lillian cooked while Caleb washed up at the pump, then shaved carefully using the cracked mirror on the wall. She pretended not to watch, but she noticed how much younger he looked without the scruff, how the hard lines of his face softened. He wasn't handsome exactly, but he had a good face, honest and strong and kind in its quiet way. Dinner was beans and bacon with fresh bread, simple but substantial. They ate while the lamplight flickered and moths beat against the windows. Outside, the night sounds of the ranch settled around them, cattle lowing, crickets singing, the distant yip of coyotes. "Tell me about Philadelphia," Caleb said suddenly. Lillian looked up, surprised. "What do you want to know?" "Anything. Everything. I've never been farther east than Cheyenne." So she told him about the brick row houses crowded together, the cobblestone streets, the markets full of things he'd probably never seen, about the school where she'd taught, the children from poor families who came with empty stomachs and full attitudes, about the libraries, the theaters, the sense that civilization was everywhere, pressing in. "Did you like it?" Caleb asked. "Parts of it. I liked the access to books, to knowledge. I liked being able to walk to a store instead of riding 2 hours. But it was also—" She paused, searching for words. Suffocating. Everyone watching everyone else, judging, measuring. There were so many rules about what was proper, what was acceptable, and if you stepped outside those lines, people noticed, people talked. Sounds like here, honestly. Small towns are the same everywhere. Maybe, but here, at least the land is big enough to breathe. He nodded slowly. Yeah, That's why I stay. Even when it's hard, even when I'm barely making it, I can't imagine being closed in somewhere. I need the sky, need the space. They sat in comfortable silence after that, the kind of quiet that felt more like understanding than absence. When Lillian finally stood to clear the dishes, Caleb stood too. I'll help. You don't have to. Partners, remember? That means shared work. So they washed dishes together in the basin, her washing and him drying, moving around each other in the small space with surprising ease. When they finished, Lillian was suddenly aware of how close they were standing, how the lamplight cast his shadow long against the wall, how tired she was, and how this strange new life was beginning to feel almost normal. Tomorrow might not go well, Caleb said quietly. The banker might say no. The feed store might refuse credit. We might come back with nothing. Then we'll figure out the next step, Lillian said, but we have to try. Why are you so sure? Because giving up is the same as dying, just slower. And I'm not ready to die yet. Are you? He met her eyes, and something passed between them. Recognition, maybe, or solidarity. Two survivors recognizing each other. No, he said. I'm not ready either. The next morning, they rode into Salvation Creek in the wagon, Lillian in her best dress, mended but clean, and Caleb in clothes that didn't smell like cattle. The town looked different in daylight, less threatening but no more welcoming. People watched them pass with open curiosity. The woman from the auction platform, the lonely rancher. Everyone would be wondering how that arrangement was working out. Let them wonder, Lillian thought. Let them see that she wasn't broken, wasn't defeated. Let them see that Caleb Hart wasn't alone anymore. They went to the bank first. The banker, Mr. Henderson, was a fat man with suspicious eyes and soft hands. He looked at them like they were bringing him bad news, which they were. Mr. Hart, he said without warmth, what can I do for you? We need to discuss the loan payment, Caleb said, and Lillian heard the effort it took him to keep his voice steady. Henderson's expression soured. The payment's due end of October. Terms were clear. We understand the terms, Lillian said, stepping forward. I'm Mrs. Hart, Mr. Henderson. I handle the ranch accounts now, and I'd like to propose an alternative arrangement that benefits both parties. Henderson's eyebrows rose. Mrs. Hart. The mail-order bride. I heard Hart bought himself a wife at auction. You heard wrong, Lillian said coolly. Mr. Hart married me in a legal arrangement. Now, would you like to discuss business, or would you prefer to trade gossip like a washwoman? Caleb made a small sound that might have been a laugh quickly suppressed. Henderson's face reddened. Fine. What's your proposal? Lillian laid out the plan exactly as they'd practiced. The ranch's current situation. The realistic projections for cattle sales. The request for a payment extension until spring. The logic of giving them time versus foreclosing on a property that would sell for less than the debt owed. Henderson listened with narrowed eyes, occasionally glancing at the ledger she'd brought, at the neat columns of numbers that proved they weren't just desperate. They were organized and honest about their desperation. Spring is 5 months away, he said finally. That's a long time to wait for payment. It's also enough time for us to improve the cattle condition, get a better price at market, and pay you in full with interest, Lillian countered. Whereas if you foreclose now, you get a failing ranch that will cost you more to maintain than it's worth, and you still won't recoup the full debt. She's right about that, Henderson admitted grudgingly. Ranch sales are slow. I'd be lucky to get $300 for the property. So you lose $100 and gain a headache, Lillian said. Or you wait 5 months and potentially get paid in full. Which serves your interests better? Henderson drummed his fingers on the desk. Caleb stood silent beside Lillian, letting her handle it, trusting her. She could feel the weight of that trust. 5 months, Henderson said finally. Payment due end of March. But I want monthly reports on the ranch's progress, written reports. And if I hear you're falling behind or selling off cattle without paying me, the deal's off and I foreclose immediately. Agreed, Lillian said before Caleb could speak. You'll have reports by the 1st of every month. They shook on it. Henderson's hand was damp and unpleasant, but Lillian didn't let her distaste show. They'd won the first battle. The feed store went easier. The owner, a grizzled man named Jacobs, had known Caleb's father and had a soft spot for the son. "About time you got some help out there," Jacobs said, looking Lillian over with approval. "You were killing yourself trying to do everything alone." "Can you extend us credit on supplemental feed?" Caleb asked. "We'll pay after cattle sales, same as always." "How much you need?" They discussed quantities and prices. Jacobs agreed to credit for enough feed to get the cattle through to October, with payment due after the sale. "You take care of him," Jacobs told Lillian as they left. "He's a good man. Deserves better luck than he's had." "I intend to," Lillian said. On the ride back, Caleb was quiet for a long time. Then, "You were incredible in there." "I was practical." "No, you were more than that. You made Henderson believe we could do this, made Jacob see us as a real partnership." He paused. "I couldn't have done that alone." "That's why partnerships work," Lillian said. "We each bring what the other lacks." They rode on through the afternoon heat, the wagon loaded with supplies and feed, the bank extension secured, a fragile hope beginning to take root. It wasn't victory, not yet, but it was breathing room. It was a chance. When they reached the ranch, Caleb unloaded the feed while Lillian put away the supplies. As she organized the new flour and salt and coffee, she felt something shift inside her. This was becoming real. This place, this arrangement, this partnership with a stranger who was becoming less strange by the day. She wasn't sure when it had happened, somewhere between learning to milk a cow and negotiating with a banker, somewhere between those first awkward silences and the easy rhythm of washing dishes together. But the Hart Ranch was starting to feel less like a refuge of last resort and more like something else, something almost like home. The supplemental feed made a difference within 2 weeks. The cattle started filling out, their ribs less prominent, their movements less lethargic. Lillian rode out with Caleb every morning now, helping him scatter the feed, checking for signs of illness or injury, learning to read the herd the way he did. Her hands had developed calluses, her skin had darkened from the sun, and her city dresses hung in the corner gathering dust while she wore the practical split skirt she'd fashioned from an old blanket. She was becoming someone new out here, someone harder and more capable than the Philadelphia schoolteacher who'd stepped off the train 2 months ago. The garden she'd planted against all odds was actually growing, late-season vegetables that might give them something fresh before winter hit. She'd found a natural spring up the hillside and dug an irrigation channel, back-breaking work that left her trembling with exhaustion, but proud in a way she'd never felt teaching grammar to bored children. Caleb watched her transformation with something that looked like wonder. They worked side by side from dawn to dusk, their conversations growing easier, their silences more comfortable. He taught her to shoot, to track, to read weather in the clouds. She taught him to keep better records, to plan ahead, to see possibilities instead of just problems. At night, they sat at the table going over the books together, her adding neat columns while he provided the details. Sometimes their hands would brush reaching for the same paper, and they'd both pull back too quickly, awkward and careful about the boundaries they'd set. Wife in name only. That was the arrangement. But the line between partnership and something deeper was getting harder to see. It was mid-September when Gideon Crowley showed up. Lillian was in the garden, pulling weeds in the morning cool, when she heard the horse approaching. She stood, shading her eyes, and saw a man on a fine bay stallion riding up the path. He sat his saddle like he owned the world, and probably owned a good chunk of it judging by the quality of his clothes and tack. Caleb emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on his pants. His whole body had gone tense. "Crowley," he said flatly. "Hart." The man dismounted with practiced ease. He was older than Caleb, maybe 40, with silver threading through his dark hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Heard you got yourself hitched. Thought I'd ride over and offer congratulations." "That's kind of you," Caleb said in a tone that suggested it wasn't kind at all. Crowley's gaze shifted to Lillian. "Mrs. Hart, I presume. Gideon Crowley. I own the spread west of here." Lillian wiped her hands on her apron and came forward. "Mr. Crowley." She didn't offer her hand, and neither did he. "Fine garden you're putting in," Crowley observed. "Ambitious for this late in the season." "We make do with what we have," Lillian said. "Indeed." Crowley turned back to Caleb. "I actually came by on business, Hart. Got a proposition for you." Not interested in selling. Didn't say I was buying, just offering a friendly arrangement between neighbors. Crowley smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Your herd's looking better. Must have gotten credit somewhere for feed. That's my business. Sure. But here's the thing. Winter's coming. Your pasture's barely holding on as it is. Come January, February, you're going to be in trouble even with supplemental feed. Now I've got good winter grazing on my north section. I'm willing to let you run your cattle there through the cold months. For a reasonable fee, of course. Caleb's jaw worked. How reasonable? $10 a head. That's $300 for your whole herd. You pay half now, half in spring. Lillian did the math instantly. $300 would wipe out any profit from cattle sales and then some. It would put them right back where they started, maybe worse. That's robbery, she said before Caleb could respond. Crowley's smile sharpened. That's business, Mrs. Hart. Supply and demand. I've got what your husband needs, and I'm willing to provide it. At market rates. Market rates would be $5 a head at most, Lillian countered. You're trying to exploit a difficult situation. I'm trying to help a neighbor, Crowley said smoothly. But if you don't want my help, that's fine. You can watch your cattle starve come February. Your choice. We'll manage, Caleb said. Appreciate the offer, but we'll manage on our own. Crowley studied them both for a long moment. Then he shrugged. Suit yourself. But when things get hard, and they will get hard, Hart, you remember I tried to help. You remember that when you're watching everything fall apart. He mounted his horse with the same easy grace. Mrs. Hart, always a pleasure to meet an educated woman. Such a shame to see one wasted out here in the middle of nowhere. He rode off before Lillian could respond, leaving them standing in the yard with his veiled threat hanging in the air like smoke. Who is he really? Lillian asked when Crowley was out of earshot. Richest rancher in the territory, owns about 5,000 acres, has 100 hired hands, ships cattle to Chicago twice a year. Caleb's voice was tight. He's been trying to buy this land since my father died. Offered half what it's worth, then got angry when I refused. He wants the water rights. Our creek feeds into his property downstream. If he owned this land, he'd control the whole watershed. So this offer wasn't about helping. Nothing Crowley does is about helping. It's about acquiring. Land, water, power doesn't matter. He wants it all. Caleb looked at her. I should have told you about him before. Should have warned you that refusing to sell made us targets. Targets for what? Anything that might convince me to give up and leave. Cattle going missing. Fences getting cut. Accidents that aren't quite accidents. He paused. My father had a barn fire 2 years before he died. Lost half his equipment, almost lost the horses. Everyone said it was lightning, but there hadn't been a storm. Lillian felt cold despite the morning sun. You think Crowley was responsible? I think Crowley gets what he wants, one way or another, and I think we just made ourselves bigger targets by refusing his offer. They stood there in the yard, the garden behind them, the cattle grazing in the distance, this fragile thing they were building suddenly feeling even more precarious. Then we watch carefully, Lillian said finally. We pay attention. We don't give him any opportunity. He'll make opportunities. Then we'll be ready. Caleb looked at her. This woman who'd been a stranger 3 months ago, who was standing beside him now facing down threats she hadn't signed up for. You could still leave, he said quietly. Those $2 would get you to Cheyenne, maybe farther. You don't have to stay for this. Yes, I do, Lillian said, because this is my home now too, my land, my future, and I'll be damned if I let some rich bully take it from us without a fight. The first snow came early that year, in late October, a light dusting that melted by noon but served as a warning of what was coming. Lillian and Caleb worked harder, preparing, cutting extra wood, reinforcing the barn, moving the cattle closer to the homestead where they could be watched more easily. Every fence was checked, every gate secured. They took turns on night watch, one of them always listening for sounds that didn't belong. The cattle sale went better than expected. 23 head brought $640, enough to pay the bank, buy winter supplies, and have a small cushion left over. Henderson seemed almost disappointed when Lillian delivered the payment in full, with interest ahead of schedule. Didn't think you'd make it, he admitted. Then you underestimated us. Lillian said pleasantly. We'll be keeping the account open, Mr. Henderson, for spring operations. She walked out of that bank with her head high, feeling like they'd won something real. But the victory was short-lived. 3 weeks later, in mid-November, Caleb came back from checking the herd with his face like stone. What's wrong? Lillian asked immediately. The north gate was open, the one leading to Crowley's property. How many? Can't tell yet, at least a dozen scattered, maybe more. In this cold, if they've wandered far. He didn't finish the sentence. They both knew what happened to cattle that got lost in Montana winter. They froze, starved, or got picked off by wolves. Could the gate have come loose on its own? Caleb showed her the chain he was carrying. This was locked. Someone cut through it. The metal links were sheared clean through, the cut fresh and deliberate. This wasn't weather or accident. This was sabotage. We go after them, Lillian said. Now, before the temperature drops tonight. It's a 2-person job, at least. I'll need to ride to town, get help. You have help. Me. We go together. Lillian, it's dangerous. If we get caught in weather, if we wait, we lose the cattle. You said it yourself. She was already moving toward the barn. Saddle Jesse. I'll get supplies and blankets. We leave in 20 minutes. They rode out into the growing cold, following the scattered trail of hoofprints north toward Crowley's land. The sky was heavy with clouds, the kind that promised snow before nightfall. Caleb led the way. Reading signs, Lillian was just learning to see. Broken grass, disturbed earth, the tracks of frightened cattle running. They found the first group an hour out, 6 head huddled in a ravine, cold and confused. Caleb and Lillian worked together to turn them back south, using their horses to guide and pressure, speaking low and steady. It was slow, careful work. The cattle were skittish, the terrain rough. By the time they got those 6 back to the main herd and secured, the sky had darkened and the first snowflakes were falling. We should head back, Caleb said. We're still missing at least 6 more. Lillian, look at that sky. We've got maybe an hour before this gets serious. Then we use that hour. She pulled her coat tighter. I didn't come this far to lose half our herd to some rich man's sabotage. Did you? He looked at her, snow already catching in her hair, her face set and stubborn, refusing to quit, and something in his chest tightened painfully. No, he said. I didn't. They rode deeper into the emptiness, splitting up to cover more ground, but staying within shouting distance. The snow began falling harder, thick flakes that stuck and accumulated fast. Visibility dropped. The temperature plummeted. Lillian's fingers went numb even through her gloves. She found 3 more cattle sheltering under a rocky overhang, their breath steaming in the frigid air. She called for Caleb, and together they got the cattle moving back toward home, fighting through snow that was ankle-deep now and rising. That's 9, Caleb shouted over the wind. We need to get back before we can't see the way. There are still more out there, and we'll be out there dead with them if we don't go now. Lillian knew he was right. The storm was getting worse by the minute, the snow coming down so thick it was like riding through a white wall. But the thought of those lost cattle, freezing alone in the dark because someone had deliberately sabotaged their gate, made her furious enough to push past fear. 5 more minutes, she said. Give me 5 more minutes. She rode east, straining to see through the storm, and almost missed them, 4 cattle huddled together, already half buried in drifting snow. She whistled for Caleb, and he appeared out of the white like a ghost, his hat and shoulders caked with snow. Together they got the cattle on their feet and moving. The animals were lethargic from cold, stumbling, resistant. It took precious minutes to get them headed in the right direction. That's 13, Caleb said. We're still missing. A bellow cut through the storm. Both of them turned toward the sound, straining to pinpoint it. Northwest, Lillian said. Maybe a quarter mile. We can't. I'm going. You get these 13 home. I'll find the others and follow. Like hell you will. We stay together or we both go back now. They stared at each other through the driving snow, 2 stubborn people who'd learned they were evenly matched in determination. Together then, Lillian said, but we move fast. They found the last 4 cattle a quarter mile out, trapped in a snowdrift against a fallen tree. One was down and wouldn't get up. The others were lowing in distress, their fear a palpable thing. Caleb dismounted and waded into the drift, fighting to reach the downed cow. Lillian worked to calm the others, her voice steady even as her whole body shook with cold. "She's stuck," Caleb called. "Legs caught under the tree. I need to dig her out." "We don't have time. I'm not leaving her to freeze." So Lillian held the horses and kept the other cattle calm while Caleb dug through snow with his bare hands, his gloves abandoned for better grip. She watched him work with fierce, desperate strength, refusing to quit even when it seemed impossible, and understood something fundamental about the man she'd married. He would save what could be saved. He would fight for every single life in his care. He would go down swinging before he'd give up, and she would do the same. She dismounted and waded into the drift beside him. "Tell me what to do." Together they dug, cleared, lifted. The cow struggled and they heaved, and finally, the leg came free. The animal scrambled up, wild-eyed but mobile. "Go," Caleb gasped. "Get them moving. I'll get the horses." The ride back was a nightmare. Zero visibility, numbing cold, cattle that kept trying to stop and shelter, a trail that had disappeared under fresh snow. Caleb led by instinct and prayer, Lillian brought up the rear, and somehow, through sheer stubborn will, they made it. The barn emerged from the white like salvation. They drove the cattle inside, counted heads, 17, they'd saved 17 out of what might have been 20, and collapsed against the barn wall, shaking with exhaustion and cold. "We did it," Lillian said through chattering teeth. "You're insane," Caleb said. But he was smiling, that rare, full smile that transformed his whole face. "Absolutely insane. You could have died out there. So could you. I've been doing this for years. And now you have help. That's the whole point, isn't it?" She looked at him, both of them covered in snow and ice, both of them alive and victorious. "We're partners, Caleb. We face things together." Something shifted in his expression, something deep and fundamental. He reached out and brushed snow from her hair, his hand lingering a moment longer than necessary. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Partners." They staggered to the cabin through the storm, too cold to do more than strip off wet outer layers and huddle by the fire Lillian built up to roaring. She made coffee with shaking hands while Caleb wrapped blankets around both of them. They sat on the floor in front of the hearth, shoulders touching, sharing heat and relief. "Crowley did this," Lillian said when she could speak without her teeth chattering. "You know he did." "I know, but I can't prove it. So he gets away with it. For now." Caleb stared into the fire. "But we beat him today. We saved the herd. We didn't let him win. This time. What about next time?" "Next time we'll be ready. We'll keep watch, check the fences twice a day, sleep in shifts if we have to. We'll make it so hard for him to sabotage us that it's not worth his effort." Lillian leaned her head against his shoulder, too exhausted to maintain proper distance. He didn't pull away. They sat there together, warming slowly, listening to the storm rage outside while the fire crackled and the saved cattle settled in the barn. "Thank you," Caleb said quietly, "for not giving up out there, for pushing when I wanted to quit, for being as stubborn as you are." "You didn't want to quit," Lillian said. "You wanted to keep me safe. That's different." "Yeah, well, you're not very good at staying safe. Neither are you." He laughed, a real laugh, and she felt it rumble through his chest where she was pressed against him. When had that happened? When had they stopped being careful about touching? She should move away, should restore the proper distance between business partners. But she was so tired and he was so warm, and for the first time since arriving in Montana, she felt completely safe. "Lillian," Caleb said, and something in his voice made her look up. His face was close to hers, closer than it had ever been. His eyes were serious, searching. "This arrangement we made, wife in name only, is that still what you want?" Her heart kicked hard against her ribs. "What are you asking?" "I'm asking if anything's changed for you, because it's changed for me. I didn't plan on it, didn't expect it, but somewhere between teaching you to milk a cow and watching you negotiate with Henderson and riding through a blizzard to save cattle." He stopped, swallowed. "You're not just a partner anymore. You're not just someone I'm working with to save the ranch. You're more than that. And I need to know if I'm alone in feeling this way." Lillian's breath caught. She should be careful here. Should think this through logically. but logic had never kept her warm or made her laugh or fought through a snowstorm beside her. "You're not alone," she said quietly. "I feel it too. This thing between us. I don't know when it started. Maybe when you gave me those silver dollars. Maybe when you stood beside me at the bank. Maybe tonight when we refused to give up. But it's real, and it's more than business. So where does that leave us?" "I don't know. We agreed to terms. Wife in name only. We shook on it." "We can make new terms," Caleb said, "if we both want to." "What terms?" He reached up and cupped her face with his work-rough hand. "The kind where this is real. Where we're not just partners trying to survive, but two people choosing each other. Building something together that's bigger than just saving a ranch." Lillian closed her eyes, feeling the weight and warmth of his palm against her cheek. How long had it been since someone touched her with such careful tenderness? How long since she'd let someone see past her defenses to the loneliness underneath? "I'm afraid," she whispered. "I'm afraid this is just proximity, just two desperate people clinging to each other because we're all we have. I'm afraid that when things get easier, you'll realize I'm not what you really want." "And I'm afraid I'm not enough for you," Caleb said. "Afraid that you'll wake up one day and realize you settled, that you gave up everything you knew for a failing ranch and a man who can barely read. But I'm more afraid of not trying, of letting fear keep me from telling you that I—" He stopped, took a breath. "That I love you, Lillian. I love your strength and your stubbornness and the way you face impossible things without flinching. I love how you turned this place from a house into a home. I love who I am when I'm with you. And if you'll have me, really have me, not just as a partner but as a husband, I swear I'll spend the rest of my life proving you didn't settle." Tears stung Lillian's eyes. "I didn't settle. I chose. There's a difference." "So choose again," Caleb said. "Choose this. Choose us. Not because you have to, but because you want to." She opened her eyes and looked at him, this good, strong, stubborn man who'd saved her from humiliation and given her dignity and partnership, and now was offering her something even more precious: love, real, honest, chosen love. "I choose this," she said. "I choose us. I choose you, Caleb Hart, with full knowledge of what that means and what we're facing. I choose you freely." He kissed her then, soft and careful and full of promise. She kissed him back, her cold hands coming up to frame his face, and felt something inside her that had been locked tight for years finally open. When they pulled apart, both breathless, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "We're really doing this," he said. "We're really doing this. We might still lose the ranch. Winter's going to be hard. Crowley's not going to stop trying to force us out. I know. And I'm still terrible at reading, and you're still going to boss me around, and we're going to argue about everything. I know that too. But we'll face it together." "Yes," Lillian said. "Together. Always." They stayed there by the fire as the storm raged outside, holding each other, making quiet promises in the firelight. The ranch was still in danger. Crowley was still a threat. Winter would still test them in 100 different ways. But they had each other now. Really had each other. And that made all the difference. Sometime in the night, the storm finally broke. The sky cleared to reveal stars so bright and numerous, they looked like someone had scattered diamonds across black velvet. Caleb and Lillian stood on the porch, wrapped in the same blanket, watching the world transform into something clean and new. "Beautiful," Lillian whispered. "Yeah," Caleb said, but he was looking at her, not the stars. She turned in his arms and kissed him again, longer this time, deeper. When they finally went inside, it was together. When Caleb climbed the ladder to the loft, Lillian followed, and when they lay down in the narrow bed under the sloping roof, it was as husband and wife in truth, not just in name. Whatever came next, threats or storms or Crowley's schemes, they would face it the way they'd faced that blizzard. Together, stubborn, refusing to quit. The $2 wife and the failing rancher, choosing each other against all odds and all logic, building something real from desperation and hope and love that had snuck up on them when they weren't looking. Outside, the saved cattle settled in the barn. The land slept under fresh snow. And inside the small cabin, Two people who'd been alone too long finally found home in each other's arms. Morning came quiet and crystalline, the world transformed by snow into something almost magical. Lillian woke in Caleb's arms in the loft, warm despite the cold air, and for the first time in years felt completely at peace. He was already awake, watching her with an expression so tender it made her chest ache. "Morning," he said softly. "Morning." She traced the line of his jaw with her finger. "No regrets?" "Not a single one. You?" "Only that we waited so long." He smiled and kissed her forehead. "We had to become partners first, had to learn to trust each other. Last night wouldn't have meant the same without everything that came before." "Practical even in romance," Lillian teased. "One of us has to be." He sat up reluctantly. "But we've still got cattle to feed and fences to check, especially after yesterday." They dressed and climbed down together, and Lillian felt the shift in everything. The cabin looked the same but felt different, warmer somehow. They moved around each other, making breakfast with new familiarity, shoulders brushing, small touches that hadn't been there before. Everything had changed, and nothing had changed, and somehow that was perfect. After breakfast, they went out to assess the damage from the storm and sabotage. The cut chain on the north gate was still there, evidence of Crowley's malice. Caleb examined it again in daylight, his face hard. "We need to replace this with something he can't cut so easily," he said. "Iron bar with a padlock?" Lillian suggested. "That'll work. I'll ride to town for supplies this afternoon. You feel up to watching things here?" "I'll be fine. The rifle's loaded, and I know how to use it now." He looked at her, his wife, his partner, standing in the snow with her chin up and her eyes clear, and felt a surge of pride mixed with fear. She was capable, yes, but that didn't mean he wanted to leave her alone with Crowley potentially lurking.
"If anyone comes by while I'm gone, I'll be polite but firm, and I won't let them pass the porch."
She squeezed his hand. "Stop worrying. I survived Philadelphia creditors and auction blocks. I can handle a neighbor visit." So Caleb rode to town, and Lillian threw herself into work. She fed the cattle and checked each one for injuries from yesterday's ordeal. She mucked the barn, collected eggs, milked Molly. She was carrying water from the pump when she heard the horse approaching and turned to see a rider coming up the path. Not Crowley this time. A woman, sitting side saddle on a gray mare, dressed in fine wool with a fur-trimmed cloak. She looked like money and breeding, completely out of place in the rough Montana landscape. Lillian set down the water bucket and waited on the porch, one hand resting casually near the rifle just inside the door. The woman dismounted with practiced grace and approached, her smile polished and sharp. "Mrs. Hart, I presume. I'm Eleanor Crowley, Gideon's wife." Of course she was. Lillian kept her expression neutral. "Mrs. Crowley, what brings you all the way out here? I heard about your ordeal yesterday. The storm, the scattered cattle. How absolutely frightening that must have been." Eleanor's voice dripped with false sympathy. "I wanted to check that you were all right and see if there was anything we could do to help." "We're fine, thank you. We managed." "I'm sure you did. You seem quite capable." Eleanor looked around the property with barely concealed disdain. "Though I must say this is very different from Philadelphia, isn't it? Such a remote location, so isolated. It must be quite an adjustment for someone of your background." "I'm adjusting fine." "Are you? Because Gideon mentioned that your husband is struggling financially, that you've had to take on credit just to feed your cattle. That's such a precarious position to be in, especially heading into winter." Eleanor stepped closer, her smile never wavering. "You know, Gideon's offer still stands. He would pay fair market value for this property. Enough that you and Mr. Hart could start fresh somewhere less harsh, somewhere more suited to your talents." Lillian understood what was happening. The husband makes threats, the wife makes offers. Good strategy if you were dealing with someone who could be intimidated or persuaded. But Lillian had faced worse than a rich woman's condescension. "Please thank your husband for his concern," Lillian said coolly, "but we're not interested in selling. We're building something here, and we intend to see it through." Eleanor's smile tightened. "How admirable. Though I wonder if you fully understand what you're committing to. The winters here are brutal. The isolation can drive people mad. And accidents happen so frequently in ranch country. Fires, injuries, livestock losses. It would be terrible if something happened to either you or your husband, leaving the other alone in such a vulnerable position. The threat was barely veiled. Lillian felt her temper flare but kept her voice steady. Is that a warning, Mrs. Crowley? Just concern from one woman to another. I'd hate to see you suffer unnecessarily when there are easier paths available. Eleanor remounted her horse with fluid grace. Think about it, dear. Really think. Is this life worth the cost? Is this man worth sacrificing your future for? He's worth everything, Lillian said without hesitation. And this life is the future I chose. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have work to do. Eleanor's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something cold and cruel underneath. Then the polished smile returned. Of course. Do give my regards to your husband, and remember, our door is always open if you change your mind. She rode off, leaving Lillian standing on the porch with her heart pounding and her hands clenched. The message had been clear: sell or suffer the consequences. The Crowleys weren't going to stop. They were going to escalate. When Caleb returned that afternoon, she told him everything. He listened with a face like stone, his jaw working. She threatened you, he said flatly. She implied. There's a difference. Not much of one. He paced the cabin, agitated. This is getting dangerous, Lillian. Maybe we should consider... Don't say it. Don't you dare suggest we sell. I'm suggesting we might be in over our heads. Crowley has money, influence, men who'll do whatever he asks. We have nothing but stubbornness. We have each other, Lillian said. We have this land and our future and a reason to fight. That's more than nothing. It won't protect you if something happens. If he sends men here while I'm away, if he... Caleb stopped, took a breath. I can't lose you. Not now. Not when I just found you. Lillian crossed to him and took his face in her hands. Then don't lose me. Fight with me. Stand with me. But don't ask me to run. I didn't come all this way. Didn't build all this. Didn't fall in love with you just to give up when things get hard. He closed his eyes and leaned into her touch. You're going to be the death of me. Or the making of you. We'll find out together. They stood there in the fading afternoon light, holding each other, drawing strength from their shared stubbornness. Outside, winter was settling in hard. The temperatures dropped, the snow accumulated, and the work became a daily battle against cold and isolation. But inside the cabin, warmth had taken root. They were a team now in every sense, and that made the difference between merely surviving and actually living. December brought the deepest cold Lillian had ever experienced. Water froze in the pump overnight. Breath turned to ice crystals in the air. The cattle huddled together for warmth while Caleb and Lillian took turns breaking ice on the water troughs and distributing feed. Every task took twice as long through layers of wool and fur. Lillian's hands cracked and bled despite the salve she made from beeswax and rendered fat. But they made it work. They developed routines, divided labor, supported each other through the grinding difficulty of Montana winter. And at night, they collapsed into bed together and held each other against the cold, sharing body heat and quiet conversations about the future they were building. I want to expand the garden in spring, Lillian said one night. Put in more variety. Maybe try some fruit trees if we can afford saplings. Fruit trees take years to produce, Caleb said. So? We'll be here for years, won't we? He pulled her closer. Yeah, we will. And I want to fix up the house. Add a proper bedroom, maybe a room for your office, so you can keep the books there instead of at the kitchen table. My office, Caleb repeated, amused. I'm a rancher, not a businessman. You're both, and you should have space that reflects that. She paused. And eventually we'll need more rooms. For children. She felt him go still. Children. Is that something you want? We never discussed it. I want everything with you, Caleb said quietly. A real home, a family, a future. I want to build something that lasts beyond just us. Something our children can inherit and be proud of. Then that's what we'll do. They lay there planning impossible futures, dreaming out loud, making promises to each other and to the life they were creating. Outside, the winter pressed close and threatening, but inside, hope burned steady as a lamp flame. It was the second week of January when disaster struck. Caleb had gone to check the far pasture where a handful of cattle had been grazing near a stand of pines. He'd been gone about an hour when Lillian heard the gunshot. Her blood went cold. She grabbed the rifle and ran toward the sound, her heart hammering against her ribs. She found Caleb standing over a dead wolf, his pistol still drawn, his face pale. "It went for the cattle," he said. "Tried to bring down the red heifer. I got it before it could do much damage, but—" He gestured toward the heifer, who was standing apart from the others, blood staining her flank. Lillian examined the wound. Deep gashes from claws, but not life-threatening if they could keep it clean and prevent infection. "We need to get her back to the barn, clean this properly." They managed to drive the injured heifer back with the others. Then Caleb set to work treating the wound while Lillian kept watch. He worked with steady hands, cleaning and packing the gashes with the same care he'd shown digging that cow out of the snowdrift months ago. "She'll be all right," he said finally, "if infection doesn't set in. If the wound doesn't reopen." Two big ifs. They kept the heifer isolated in the barn, checking her twice daily, changing the dressing, watching for signs of fever or rot. For 3 days she seemed stable. Then on the fourth morning, Lillian found her down, burning with fever, the wound angry and swollen. "Infection," Caleb said grimly. "Despite everything we did." They fought for her, applied poultices, forced water and feed, kept her warm and comfortable. But on the 6th day, the heifer died. One more loss in a winter that was taking everything it could get its hands on. Caleb took it hard. He'd saved that heifer as a calf when her mother rejected her, bottle-fed her through her first winter, nursed her through illness before. She'd been one of his best producers, strong and healthy until the wolf attack. "It's not your fault," Lillian said, finding him in the barn, standing over the body. "You did everything you could. Wasn't enough. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes we lose despite doing everything right. That doesn't mean we failed." He turned to her, and she saw the weight he was carrying, not just grief over the heifer, but everything. The constant pressure, the threats from Crowley, the financial precariousness, the responsibility of keeping them both alive through winter. He was 28 years old and looked 50 in that moment. "How do you keep going?" he asked. "When it feels like everything's against us, when we're losing ground despite fighting so hard, how do you not just give up?" Because giving up means Crowley wins, means everything we've built was for nothing, means that woman on the auction block got sold for $2 silver and stayed sold. She stepped closer. "I keep going because this is my life now, and I'll be damned if I let anyone or anything take it from me. And because you're beside me, and together we're stronger than anything they can throw at us." "You're sure about that?" "I'm sure about you, about us. That's enough." He pulled her into his arms and held on tight. They stood there in the cold barn with the dead heifer at their feet, two people refusing to break, and somehow that refusal itself was victory enough to keep going. They buried the heifer before the ground froze completely solid. It took hours of backbreaking work with pick and shovel, but Caleb insisted on doing it right. He owed her that much. That night, they updated the ledger. One less head meant less profit in spring, less cushion against disaster. The margins were getting tighter. "We're still ahead of where we were last year," Lillian pointed out. "We've got a better herd, better feed, better organization. We're going to make it. If nothing else goes wrong." "Something else will go wrong. That's ranching. That's life. We'll handle it the same way we've handled everything else, together and stubborn." Caleb almost smiled. "You sound like me now." "Good. Means we're rubbing off on each other." The next weeks brought more challenges. A fence broke under heavy snow, requiring emergency repair in below-zero temperatures. The pump mechanism froze despite their precautions, meaning they had to haul water from the creek until Caleb could thaw and fix it. 3 more cattle took sick with what looked like respiratory illness, requiring constant monitoring and care. But they also brought small victories. The sick cattle recovered. The fence held through the next storm. The remaining herd stayed strong and healthy, actually gaining weight despite the harsh conditions. And Caleb and Lillian grew closer through it all, their partnership deepening into something unshakable. It was late February when the real test came. Caleb woke in the middle of the night to an orange glow through the window and the smell of smoke. He was on his feet and moving before conscious thought kicked in, Lillian right behind him. The barn was on fire. Flames were licking up the south wall, fed by dry wood and old hay, spreading fast. Inside, the cattle were bellowing in terror, the chickens screaming, the smoke already thick enough to choke on. "Get water," Caleb shouted, already running toward the barn. "As much as you can carry." Lillian ran for buckets while Caleb threw open the barn doors and plunged into the smoke. The heat hit him like a wall, but he pushed through, finding the latch on the cattle pen and throwing it open. The animals stampeded out into the snow, wild with fear, scattering into the night. He went back for the chickens, grabbing cages, coughing as smoke filled his lungs. The flames were roaring now, consuming the south wall, reaching for the loft where the hay was stored. If that caught, the whole structure would go up like a torch. Lillian appeared with buckets, throwing water on the flames, but it was like spitting on a bonfire. "Not enough. Not nearly enough." "We need to let it burn," she gasped. "Save what we can and let the rest go." "The tools are in there, the saddles, everything we—" "You go back in there and you die," Lillian said fiercely. "Is that what you want? To die for tools we can replace?" He stared at the burning barn, at everything his father had built going up in flames, and felt something inside him crack. This was it. This was Crowley's final play. Not subtle sabotage or veiled threats, but outright destruction. "The house," Caleb said suddenly. "If the wind shifts, sparks could reach the house." They turned their efforts to protecting the cabin, soaking the roof and walls, clearing away anything that could catch. The barn burned through the night, a massive bonfire that lit up the landscape for miles, and all they could do was watch their livelihood go up in smoke. By dawn, it was over. The barn was a smoking ruin, just charred beams and ash. The cattle were scattered across the property, spooked and skittish. The chickens were gone, either burned or escaped into the wilderness. The tools, the saddles, the hay stores, all gone. Caleb and Lillian stood in the yard covered in soot and ash, staring at the destruction, too exhausted to speak. "He did this," Caleb said finally. "Crowley did this." "Can you prove it?" "No, but I know. Same as I knew about the cut chain. Same as I knew about my father's barn fire." His hands clenched into fists. "He's escalating, trying to break us completely." "Then we don't break." Lillian's voice was hoarse from smoke, but steady. "We rebuild. We replace what we can. We keep going." "With what?" "We just lost everything we can't afford to replace. The barn alone will cost more than we have, and that's not counting tools, equipment, feed. We're finished, Lillian. He won." "No." She grabbed his arm, forced him to look at her. "He destroyed a building. That's all. The cattle are alive. We're alive. We still have the land, the house, each other. That's not finished. That's just harder. I can't ask you to stay for this, to live through this kind of—" "You're not asking. I'm choosing. Same as I chose you in that cabin months ago. Same as I choose you every single day. Fire doesn't change that. Crowley doesn't change that. Nothing changes that unless you tell me right now that you're giving up." Caleb looked at her, his wife, his partner, standing in the ruins, refusing to quit, and felt something fierce and protective surge through him. "I'm not giving up," he said. "Not on this ranch. Not on us. Never on us." "Then we start rebuilding today." They rounded up the scattered cattle first, working through their exhaustion to account for every head. Miraculously, they'd lost none to the fire, though several bore minor burns that would need treating. The chickens were mostly gone, but they found 3 hens huddled under the porch, traumatized but alive. Then Caleb rode to town while Lillian began sorting through the barn wreckage for anything salvageable. He went to the sheriff first, reported the fire, described the circumstances. The sheriff, a weathered man named Coleman, listened with a skeptical expression. "You saying Gideon Crowley burned your barn?" Coleman asked. "I'm saying someone did, and Crowley's been trying to force me off my land for 3 years. You got proof? No? Then there's nothing I can do. Could have been lightning, could have been a spark from your stove, could have been bad luck. Without evidence of arson, it's just an accident." "It wasn't an accident." "Then find me proof." Coleman's expression softened slightly. "Look, Hart, I know you've had a hard run, and I know Crowley can be aggressive in his business dealings, but I can't arrest a man on suspicion. You understand?" Caleb understood perfectly. Crowley had money and influence. Caleb had neither. Justice, like everything else, was for sale. He went to the bank next. Henderson heard him out with increasing skepticism. "You want more credit," Henderson said, "to rebuild a barn that just burned down, after I already extended your debt payment and gave you breathing room. I'll pay it back, same as before, after spring sales. With what cattle? You just told me half your feed stores burned. How are you going to keep your herd healthy until spring? How are you going to get good prices for skinny cattle?" "I'll figure it out." "That's not good enough anymore, Hart." Henderson leaned back in his chair. "I took a risk on you before because your wife convinced me you had a plan. But this changes everything. You're a liability now. One more disaster and you're completely underwater. So help me prevent the next disaster. Give me the credit I need to rebuild properly, to protect what we have. Or I could foreclose now, cut my losses, and sell the land to someone who actually has the resources to work it." Henderson's expression was almost sympathetic. "I'm sorry, Hart, but I'm running a business, not a charity. The answer is no." Caleb left the bank with his last hope extinguished. No credit meant no rebuild. No rebuild meant they couldn't house the cattle properly, couldn't protect their equipment, couldn't function as a real ranch. They were crippled, and everyone knew it. He was walking back to his wagon when a voice stopped him. "Mr. Hart?" He turned to find Gideon Crowley standing there, impeccably dressed as always, his expression neutral. "Heard about your fire," Crowley said. "Terrible thing. You have my sympathies." Caleb's hands clenched. "Do I?" "Absolutely. Barn fires are devastating. I lost one myself years back. I know exactly what you're going through." Crowley stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Which is why I'm prepared to make you an offer. A generous one, considering your circumstances." "I'm not interested." "You haven't heard the terms yet. I'll pay you fair market value for your land, $800. That's twice what Henderson would get at foreclosure. Plus, I'll hire you on as a ranch hand at good wages. You'd have steady work, a place to live, security for you and your wife. All you have to do is sign over the deed." $800 was more money than Caleb had seen in years. It would pay off all his debts, give them a fresh start somewhere else, end the constant struggle and fear. It was more than generous. It was also surrender. "The answer is no," Caleb said. Crowley's expression hardened. "You're making a mistake." "That's my right." "Think about your wife, Hart. Think about what you're putting her through. She deserves better than this, better than poverty and danger and living in constant fear of what might happen next. A good husband would put her welfare first." "A good husband would fight for what's theirs," Caleb said. "A good husband wouldn't sell out just because things got hard. And a good husband definitely wouldn't take advice from the man who's been sabotaging him. Careful with accusations you can't prove." "I can't prove anything. We both know that. But we also both know the truth." Caleb met Crowley's eyes. "You're not going to win. No matter what you burn, what you destroy, what you threaten, we're not leaving. That land is mine. That future is mine. And you can't buy or burn or intimidate that away." He walked away before Crowley could respond, his heart pounding but his head high. He just made an enemy more powerful than him, had just refused help he desperately needed, had just committed them both to an impossible fight. But he'd done it on his terms, and that mattered. When he got home and told Lillian everything, Henderson's refusal, Crowley's offer, his own defiant response, she listened without interrupting. Then she kissed him hard. "I'm proud of you," she said, "for standing up to him, for choosing us over easy money. Easy money would have solved a lot of problems. And created worse ones. We'd spend the rest of our lives wondering what if, wondering if we could have made it if we just tried harder. This way we'll know. We'll fight with everything we have, and whatever happens, we'll know we didn't quit. We might lose everything. Then we'll lose it together. But we're not going to lose. We're going to rebuild that barn with our own hands if we have to. We're going to keep this ranch running through pure stubbornness. And we're going to prove to Gideon Crowley that he can't break us." Caleb pulled her close and held on tight. "How did I get so lucky to find you?" $2 silver and good timing," Lillian said. "Best investment you ever made." They started rebuilding the next day. With no money for lumber or hired help, they had to be creative. Caleb salvaged what he could from the burned barn.
Beams that were charred but still structurally sound, nails and metal fittings that could be cleaned and reused. He rode to neighbors and traded labor for materials, working their land in exchange for planks and posts. Lillian learned carpentry by doing, holding boards while Caleb hammered, measuring and cutting under his instruction. Her hands developed new calluses, her shoulders ached from unfamiliar work, but she pushed through. They worked from sunrise to sunset, racing against time to get shelter for the cattle before the next storm hit. Neighbors started showing up, people Caleb had helped over the years, people who respected his stubbornness, people who didn't like Crowley's tactics even if they wouldn't say so publicly. They brought tools, materials, labor. Old Jacobs from the feed store showed up with credit he'd officially denied but was willing to extend under the table. A couple of ranch hands Crowley had fired for unknown reasons appeared and worked for meals instead of wages. Slowly, impossibly, a new barn began to take shape. It wasn't as big as the old one. It wasn't as fine, but it was solid and weatherproof, and it was theirs, built with their hands, their sweat, their refusal to quit. The day they finished, Caleb and Lillian stood in front of it, exhausted and triumphant. "We did it," Lillian said. "We did it," Caleb agreed, "and Crowley can go to hell." That night, they celebrated with a bottle of whiskey Jacobs had slipped them, sitting on the porch watching the stars, too tired to do more than exist in each other's presence. "Spring's coming," Lillian said. "We're going to make it." "Yeah," Caleb said. "We are." And for the first time since the fire, he actually believed it. Spring came late that year, reluctant and tentative, as if testing whether Montana was ready to let go of winter's grip. The snow melted slowly, revealing brown grass that would need weeks to green up, and the creek that had been frozen solid began to flow again with a sound like freedom. Caleb and Lillian emerged from the hardest winter of their lives, leaner, tougher, and more united than ever. The new barn stood solid against the March winds, a testament to their refusal to break. The cattle had survived, though they'd lost 2 more to illness and 1 to what looked like a deliberate poisoning, salt lick laced with something toxic that Caleb discovered too late. They couldn't prove it was Crowley, but they knew. They always knew. 16 head left, Caleb said one morning, tallying the herd as they grazed on the emerging grass. "That's what we're working with." 16 healthy head, Lillian corrected, watching the cattle spread across the pasture. "Look at them, Caleb. They made it. We made it. We need at least 20 to make decent profit at market. Then we breed smart this spring and build the herd back up. We've done harder things." She was right, of course. They'd survived sabotage, fire, winter, and Crowley's relentless pressure. Rebuilding the herd was just work, and work they could handle. But as April arrived and the land began its slow transformation back to life, something else began to shift. Lillian started feeling sick in the mornings, a persistent nausea that had nothing to do with the food she ate and everything to do with the future growing inside her. She waited until she was certain before telling Caleb. They were in the garden together, preparing the soil for spring planting, when she set down her tools and looked at him. "I'm pregnant," she said simply. His hand stilled on the shovel. "You're sure?" 3 months sure. I'd say conception happened sometime in January, probably that night after we fought through the blizzard. She smiled slightly. "Apparently we're very efficient." Caleb dropped the shovel and pulled her into his arms, his face buried in her hair. She felt him trembling slightly, heard his breath catch. "Hey," she said gently. "This is good news, isn't it?" "It's the best news," he said, his voice rough. "It's just, I never let myself hope for this. For a real family, for something beyond just survival. Well, hope now, because by October we're going to have another mouth to feed. Think the ranch can handle it?" He pulled back to look at her, his hands framing her face. "The ranch will handle whatever it has to. Same as us. We'll make it work. Even with me unable to do heavy labor in a few months. Especially then. You'll keep the books, manage the planning, grow the garden. I'll handle the heavy work. We'll adjust, same as we always do." He kissed her softly. "We're having a baby." "We're having a baby," Lillian confirmed and felt joy bubble up through all the fear and uncertainty. "Our baby. The first of the next generation of hearts." They stood there in the garden with the spring sun warm on their faces and the future suddenly more real and precious than it had ever been. They had to make this work now, not just for themselves, but for the child who would inherit whatever they built. The news gave them renewed purpose. Caleb threw himself into preparing for market, working the cattle harder, getting them to prime condition. Lillian organized, planned, managed every detail they could control. They moved through their days with fierce determination, knowing that one good cattle sale could change everything. It was late April when the sheriff showed up with news that shifted the entire game. "Hart," Coleman said, dismounting in the yard. "Got something you need to see." He handed Caleb a telegram. It was from the Territorial Marshal's office in Helena, requesting information about Gideon Crowley in connection with an investigation into fraudulent land acquisitions and possible arson. "What's this about?" Caleb asked. "Seems Crowley's not as untouchable as he thought. Marshall's been getting complaints from multiple ranchers across the territory. Suspicious fires, sabotage, forced sales. They're building a case." Coleman's expression was neutral, but his eyes held something that looked like satisfaction. "They'll want to talk to you about your barn fire, the cut fence, any other incidents you can document. Can you prove it was him? That's what the investigation's for. But I'll tell you this. 3 other ranchers have reported barn fires in the last 2 years, all refusing to sell to Crowley beforehand. That's a pattern. Add in your testimony and whatever physical evidence we can gather, and we might actually have something." After Coleman left, Caleb showed Lillian the telegram. She read it twice, her expression shifting from surprise to cautious hope. "This could be it," she said, "the thing that finally stops him. Or it could be nothing. Rich men have ways of avoiding consequences. Not if we make sure they don't. We document everything, Caleb. Every incident, every threat, every conversation. We build a case so solid they can't ignore it." She looked up at him. "We've been fighting alone this whole time. Now we have the law on our side. We use that." So they documented. Lillian's neat handwriting filled pages with dates, details, witness names. The cut chain from the north gate carefully preserved. The timeline of Crowley's visits and offers. Eleanor Crowley's thinly veiled threats. The suspicious poisoning of the salt lick. Everything they could remember, everything they could prove or reasonably infer. When the territorial marshal arrived in May, a stern man named Whitfield with sharp eyes and no tolerance for nonsense, they were ready. "Mr. and Mrs. Hart," Whitfield said, settling into a chair at their kitchen table. "Tell me everything." They did. Caleb spoke haltingly at first, then with growing confidence as Lillian supported his account with dates and details from her documentation. Whitfield took notes, asked pointed questions, requested to see the physical evidence. "This is good," he said finally. "Very good. You've given me more concrete information than the other ranchers combined. The problem is it's still largely circumstantial. Without a witness who'll testify to Crowley directly ordering these acts, without catching someone in the act, it's going to be hard to prosecute." "So he gets away with it," Caleb said bitterly. "Not necessarily. See, Crowley's also being investigated for fraudulent land deals, forged documents, coerced sales, bribery of territorial officials. That's federal jurisdiction, and the penalties are severe. If I can connect him to those charges and tie in the arson and sabotage as part of a pattern of illegal land acquisition, we've got him." Whitfield leaned forward. "But I need you to be patient. These things take time, and I need you to keep documenting anything else that happens." "How long?" Lillian asked. "Could be months, could be longer. Justice is slow, Mrs. Hart." "We don't have months," Caleb said. "We've got cattle to sell, a ranch to save, a baby coming. We need this resolved." Whitfield's expression softened slightly. "I understand, but rushing it means risking the case falling apart. Do you want Crowley prosecuted, or do you want him gone quickly? Because you can't have both." "We want him prosecuted," Lillian said firmly. "We want him to face real consequences so he can't do this to anyone else. We'll wait. We'll keep documenting. We'll do whatever it takes." After Whitfield left, they sat in heavy silence. Justice might be coming, but it was coming slowly, and they still had to survive until it arrived. "Market's in 3 weeks," Caleb said. "If we can get a good price for the cattle, we'll have enough to carry us through summer at least, maybe through winter if we're careful. Then that's what we focus on.
We get the best price possible, we keep the ranch running, and we let the marshal do his job. Lillian placed a hand on her still flat stomach. We're going to make it, Caleb. I can feel it. We've come too far to fail now. The cattle sale at the end of May was tense and critical. Caleb drove their 16 head to the stockyards in Billings, a 2-day journey that left Lillian alone at the ranch for the first time since the fire. She kept the rifle close and jumped at every sound, but nothing happened. Maybe Crowley knew the investigation was closing in. Maybe he'd decided to wait and watch. Either way, the days passed without incident. When Caleb returned, he was grinning wider than Lillian had ever seen. How much? She asked before he'd even dismounted. $720. She stared at him. That's impossible. 16 head can't. I met a buyer from Chicago. He's looking for breeding stock, willing to pay premium for healthy cattle from proven Montana bloodlines. I told him about our herd, about how they'd survived the winter, about their lineage from my father's original stock. He inspected them personally and made an offer on the spot. Caleb pulled her into his arms and spun her around. $720, Lillian. That's more than double what I expected. She laughed, dizzy with relief and joy. That pays off Henderson completely. That gives us winter supplies and money left over for improvements. That's everything we needed. Plus, the Chicago buyer wants first option on any calves we produce next year. He'll pay premium rates for those too if the quality holds. Caleb set her down gently, suddenly aware of her pregnancy. We did it. We actually did it. We did it, Lillian agreed, and kissed him hard. They went to the bank the next day and paid off the debt in full. Henderson counted the money twice, clearly surprised that they'd managed to pull it off. That squares your account, Hart, he said grudgingly. You're paid in full with interest. And I'd like to open a savings account with the remainder, Lillian said, for future ranch operations and family expenses. Henderson's eyebrows rose at the word family, but he processed the deposit without comment. When they walked out of that bank, they were debt-free for the first time in 3 years. The ranch was truly theirs again, unencumbered and secure. What do we do now? Caleb asked, feeling almost lost without the constant pressure of debt hanging over them. Now we build, Lillian said. We buy breeding stock to rebuild the herd. We improve the ranch. We prepare for the baby. We live the life we fought for. Summer unfolded like a gift. The garden produced abundantly, more than they could eat, so Lillian preserved and traded the surplus. Caleb bought 4 pregnant heifers and a good bull with some of their savings, investing in the future herd. They made repairs to the cabin, added a small bedroom in preparation for the baby, even whitewashed the outside so it looked fresh and cared for. Lillian's pregnancy progressed smoothly. By July, she was visibly showing, moving with the careful grace of expectant mothers. Caleb watched her with a mixture of awe and protectiveness, constantly trying to take over her chores until she threatened to brain him with a skillet if he didn't let her work. I'm pregnant, not fragile, she said for the 100th time. I can still collect eggs and weed the garden. I just don't want you to strain yourself. Then help me instead of hovering. Partnership, remember? So they worked together through the long summer days, their partnership evolving again as her body changed and their priorities shifted. They talked about names for the baby, about what kind of parents they wanted to be, about the future they were building for the next generation. It was mid-August when Marshal Whitfield returned with 2 federal agents and a warrant for Gideon Crowley's arrest. We got him, Whitfield said, his satisfaction evident. Fraudulent land deals, bribery of territorial officials, and enough circumstantial evidence on the arson charges to make a convincing case. We found a former employee willing to testify that Crowley ordered him to set your barn fire. Man got religion after a near-death experience and decided to come clean. Caleb and Lillian stood on their porch, watching as the agents headed toward Crowley's ranch. They didn't speak, just held hands and waited. By evening, the news had spread through the territory. Gideon Crowley had been arrested and taken to Helena to face federal charges. Eleanor Crowley had filed for divorce and was selling the ranch, intending to return east with whatever money remained after legal fees. The empire Crowley had built through intimidation and illegal dealings was crumbling. It's over, Lillian said quietly. Yeah, Caleb agreed. It's over. They should have felt triumphant, should have celebrated the fall of their enemy, but mostly they just felt tired and relieved. The threat that had hung over them for so long was gone. They could finally breathe. "You know what this means?" Lillian said. "We can actually plan for the future now. Real plans, not just survival strategies. We can think about expansion, about hiring help, about building something that lasts." "One step at a time," Caleb said. "First we get through the birth. Make sure you and the baby are healthy. Everything else can wait." Always so practical. One of us has to be. She leaned against him, her growing belly pressed between them. "Thank you." "For what?" "For bidding on me that day, for seeing something worth saving when everyone else saw damaged goods, for fighting beside me instead of for me, for being exactly the partner I needed, even though neither of us knew it at the time." Caleb turned her to face him, his hands gentle on her shoulders. "I'm the one who should be thanking you. You saved this ranch, saved me, turned a business arrangement into a real marriage and a failing property into a home. Everything good in my life started the day I put those $2 silver on that auction block. Best $2 you ever spent? Best decision I ever made." They kissed as the sun set over their land, over the ranch they'd saved through sheer stubborn determination, over the future they'd built from nothing but hope and hard work. The baby came in late October, during the first snowfall of the season. Lillian labored through the night with the doctor from town attending and Caleb pacing holes in the floor downstairs. When the first cry cut through the cabin just before dawn, Caleb took the stairs 2 at a time. "You have a daughter," the doctor said, handing him the squirming, red-faced bundle. "Healthy lungs on this one." Caleb looked down at his daughter, impossibly tiny, impossibly perfect, and felt his world shift and reorganize around this new center. She had Lillian's dark hair and his own eyes, and she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. "Let me see her," Lillian said weakly from the bed, and Caleb brought their daughter to her mother. Lillian cradled the baby against her chest, tears streaming down her face. "Hello, little one. We've been waiting for you." "What should we name her?" Caleb asked, sitting on the edge of the bed, his arm around Lillian's shoulders. "I was thinking Grace," Lillian said, "because Grace is what brought us together. Grace is what saved us. Grace is what this whole impossible journey has been." "Grace Hart," Caleb tested the name. "Yeah, that's perfect." They sat together in the early morning light, a family now, complete and whole. Outside, snow fell gently on the ranch they'd fought so hard to keep. Inside, warmth and love and the sound of a baby's soft breathing filled the space that had once been just a lonely cowboy's shelter. The years that followed were full and rich in ways Caleb and Lillian had never imagined possible. The ranch grew steadily. The herd expanded. They hired a young hand named Thomas, who'd been orphaned and needed work, and he became like family. Grace grew into a strong, curious child who followed her father around the ranch and learned letters and numbers at her mother's knee. 3 years after Grace was born, they had a son, Samuel, named after the man Lillian had been meant to marry, the man whose death had led her to this life. It felt right to honor that chain of events, that strange fate that had brought them together. The cabin expanded into a proper house. The barn got a new loft. The garden became Lillian's pride, producing enough to sell at market in town. Caleb's reputation as an honest rancher with quality stock spread, and buyers sought him out instead of the other way around. They became pillars of the community. Lillian started a small school for ranch children, teaching them reading and arithmetic in the big room they'd added to the house. Caleb served on the Territorial Cattlemen's Association, helping set fair prices and ethical standards. They were respected, successful, secure in ways that would have seemed impossible that hot July day in 1873. But they never forgot where they'd started. 10 years after the auction, on a summer day much like the one when they'd first met, Caleb took Lillian into town for their anniversary. They'd left Grace and Samuel with Thomas, and it felt strange and wonderful to be just the two of them again, riding side by side through country they knew, like the back of their hands. In town, Caleb stopped at the jeweler's shop. "I have something for you," he said, pulling out a small wrapped package. Lillian opened it to find a delicate gold locket. When she opened the locket, she found 2 polished silver dollars inside, fitted perfectly into the space. "Those are the original 2?" she asked, her throat tight. "Yeah. I kept them all these years.
Had the jeweler mount them so you could carry them always. He helped her fasten the locket around her neck. I know some people would want to forget how we started, want to pretend it was a proper courtship, a normal marriage. But I don't want to forget. Those $2 represent the best gamble I ever took. They represent you choosing to stay when you could have left. They represent everything we built from almost nothing. Lillian touched the locket, feeling the weight of the silver against her chest, the weight of 10 years of shared history. "You know what I see when I look at these?" she asked. "What?" "I see a man who couldn't walk away from injustice, a man who saw a stranger's dignity being stripped away and decided to do something about it, even when it cost him everything he had. I see the moment my life changed from surviving to living. I see the beginning of us." She kissed him softly. "Thank you for keeping them, for remembering." "How could I forget? That day changed everything." They walked through town together, and people greeted them warmly. Mrs. Hart the teacher, Mr. Hart the rancher, the couple who defied the odds and built something lasting. No one remembered that she'd been the leftover bride, the woman no one wanted. No one remembered that he'd been the failing rancher on the edge of losing everything. They only saw what Caleb and Lillian had become together. That evening, they attended a town gathering, a dance to celebrate the end of a successful cattle season. Lillian wore the locket openly, the silver catching the lamplight as Caleb led her onto the dance floor. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if someone else had bid on me that day?" Lillian asked as they moved to the music. "Every day. And every day I'm grateful it was me. What if I'd taken those $2 and left, used them to go back east or start over somewhere else? Then I'd have respected your choice and spent the rest of my life wondering what could have been. But you didn't leave. You stayed and fought and built this life beside me. That's what matters." "I love you," Lillian said simply. "I don't say it enough, but I do. I love the life we've made. I love our children. I love the ranch and the community and everything we've become. But mostly I love you, the stubborn, honorable, impossibly good man who saw me when I was invisible to everyone else." "I love you too," Caleb said. "You're the best thing that ever happened to me, the best decision I ever made." They danced until late, surrounded by friends and neighbors, their children asleep at home under Thomas's watchful eye, their ranch secure and thriving, their future bright with possibility. When they finally headed home under the stars, Lillian touched the locket at her throat and smiled. $2, she said. That's all it took to change 2 lives completely. $2 and 2 stubborn people refusing to give up, Caleb amended. The best kind of love story, Lillian agreed. Not the one you plan for, but the one you build together. They rode home through the Montana night, past land they'd fought for and won, past fences they'd repaired and cattle they'd saved, toward a house that had become a home and a partnership that had become a legacy. The auction platform in Salvation Creek had been torn down years ago, replaced by a proper courthouse. The mail-order bride business had faded as the territory became more settled, more civilized. But the Hart Ranch remained, growing stronger with each passing year, a testament to what could be built when 2 people chose partnership over pride, love over fear, and each other over everything else. Grace and Samuel would inherit that ranch someday, would learn its history and carry it forward. They would know that their mother had once been bought for $2 and had turned that humiliation into dignity through sheer force of will. They would know that their father had been a failing rancher who'd risked everything on a stranger and found a partner who saved not just his land, but his life. They would know that sometimes the smallest act of decency, $2 on an auction block, a refusal to look away from injustice, could rewrite everything that followed. And they would know that love wasn't always lightning bolts and grand gestures. Sometimes it was slow and steady, built through shared work and shared struggle, through choosing each other again and again in the face of impossible odds. That was the legacy Caleb and Lillian Hart left behind. Not just a successful ranch or a respected family name, but proof that broken things could be mended, that desperate beginnings could lead to triumphant endings, and that 2 people who started with nothing but determination could build something that lasted generations. Years later, when Grace was grown and running the ranch herself, She would take that locket with the $2 and show it to her own daughter. "This," she would say, "is where our family began. $2 and two people brave enough to take a chance on each other. Remember that when things get hard. Remember that your grandmother and grandfather built all of this from almost nothing. Remember that giving up was never an option, not for them and not for us." And the story would continue, passed down through generations. The legend of the $2 wife and the cowboy who saved her. The partnership that became love. The desperate gamble that became a legacy. But that night, riding home under the stars with his wife beside him and their future secure, Caleb Hart wasn't thinking about legacy or legend. He was thinking about how lucky he was, how one impulsive decision on a hot July day had given him everything that mattered: love, family, purpose, home. "No regrets?" Lillian asked, reading his thoughts the way she often did after 10 years of marriage. "Not a single one," Caleb said. "You?" "Only that we can't go back and tell our younger selves that it all works out, that the struggle was worth it, that they should trust each other and keep fighting. They wouldn't have believed us anyway." "Probably not. We were both too stubborn to accept comfort." "Still are," Caleb said with a smile. "Good," Lillian replied. "Stubborn got us here. Stubborn will carry us forward." They reached the ranch as the moon rose high and bright, illuminating the house where their children slept, the barn they'd rebuilt with their own hands, the land they'd refused to surrender. Home. Safety. Love. Everything they'd fought for and won. Caleb helped Lillian down from the wagon and they stood for a moment in the moonlight, just looking at what they'd built. "Thank you," Lillian said quietly, her hand finding his. "For what?" "For those $2 for seeing me, for choosing me, for building this life with me, for everything." Caleb raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Thank you for staying, for fighting, for loving me, for being exactly who you are." They went inside together to check on their sleeping children and bank the fire and prepare for another day of the life they'd built together. A life that had started with humiliation and desperation, but had become something beautiful through shared determination and love. The $2 rested safe in the locket around Lillian's neck, no longer a symbol of purchase or shame, but a reminder that sometimes the smallest investment could yield the greatest returns. That sometimes what looked like an ending was really a beginning. That sometimes the best things in life came from the most unlikely places. And that love, real, lasting, chosen love, was always worth fighting for. The Hart Ranch thrived for generations, a testament to two people who'd refused to quit when quitting would have been easier. Who'd chosen partnership over pride, love over fear, and each other over everything else. Who'd proved that dignity couldn't be bought or sold, only claimed and defended. And it all started with $2 on an auction block and a cowboy who couldn't walk away from injustice, and a woman who turned humiliation into triumph through sheer strength of will. That was their story. That was their legacy. And it was enough. More than enough. It was everything.